Breath of the Wild 2 is on the horizon. Age of Calamity has been revealed and will be released close to the end of the year, and the first game in this little legacy, Breath of the Wild, was released over 3 years ago now, most likely 4 when its sequel is finally released. This batch of Zelda games isn't just a little cycle of games. It's not one sequel and done, seeing the likes of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. No. This is something different. These games are officially a trilogy, 3 games involving the same key characters, the Hero of Wilds and Princess of Wilds, Link and Zelda respectively. Breath of the Wild showed a largely complex world, the first open world game in the entirety of the series, showing both the complexity of wildlife and the simplicity of nature and its inhabitants. Age of Calamity seems to be telling a more of a bombastic story in classic Hyrule Warriors fashion, telling the story of what happened 100 years before the events of Breath of the Wild, showing us exactly what happened when Calamity Ganon rose from the depths of Hyrule Castle. And taking all that we've seen in the trailers into consideration, I highly expect that we'll be seeing the death of Breath of the Wild era Ganondorf, and a darker story with more hard-hitting music and probably more emphasis on the overworld in the sequel to Breath of the Wild. Knowing that this is now a trilogy, what exactly has that changed in the Zelda series? Well, I have a few different little theories to be quite honest with you, and I'll be sharing my ideas with you today, and maybe even you have some cool ideas about where the Zelda series can go now that they've officially created their first trilogy all held on the same console, that, you know, isn't in the CDI series.
Well, excuse me, princess.
So when I say that I have a theory on what's next in the Legend of Zelda series, I'm not talking about a gameplay theory, or about what the next game could even be about. Far from it, in fact. No, instead I'll be discussing such things as how it could change the story factor of Zelda, and also how they could deal with Zelda from gaming generation to gaming generation. So then, let's get into my first little theory. Breath of the Wild featured an all-new Link from the one seen in past games, and even from the opening segment of the Great Plateau in Breath of the Wild, he seemed like an absolute beast stroke badass. Through those magical first 2 to 5 hours of the game on a first playthrough, Link acquires 4 Sheikah abilities: Magnesis, Remote Bombs, Stasis, and Cryonis. These abilities changed how the player played with the overworld, and also unlocked some baffling combat options. But enough about that. The point is that the Hero of Wilds, through what we've seen so far, was insanely powerful. I mean, in-game notes tell us that Link somehow managed to parry a Guardian's laser with a pot lid when he was only a teenager. The point is, I think that there is a chance that we could see the Hero of Wilds for much longer than we first anticipated. Not only in the sequel and prequel, but we could also see him in future games in future generations of consoles. This really does seem like a long shot, as this would break the chain we've seen in current years of them only using Ganon and Demise. And this new idea would mean that new primary antagonists would have to be implemented within each game past the sequel. But what if the sequel to Breath of the Wild doesn't actually give us the closure of beating Ganon? Instead it leads up to an even bigger fight scene in the next Zelda game. Well, I don't really think it's possible, and you likely don't either. I like speculation, I also like to make sure every box is checked, and with the initial market of success of Breath of the Wild, I wouldn't be surprised if the same hero is still utilised again and again. Going back on a point I explained in the last theory, I'd like to talk a little bit about gaming generations and how they could play a factor in how the Zelda series changes from now on. With the launch of the Nintendo Switch, we also saw the launch of Breath of the Wild. With the launch of the Switch Lite, we saw the launch of Link's Awakening. So I think that to carry this tradition on, the sequel to Breath of the Wild must follow a similar trend, to make a triforce of trends. With this in mind, maybe we can make an assumption. Maybe we can assume from now until the next generation that we'll only play in the Breath of the Wild trilogy, and in the same vein, whenever we see the next big Nintendo platform announced, the Switch 2 or whatever it'll be called, we can expect to see a new Link at the start of the generation, and at the end of each generation would also signal the end of a certain Link's journey, so that they can finally lay down and do no more Ganon slaying. With the exception of one, no Link had a full trilogy solely showing his story, and no hero in Hyrule history has had a big trilogy all on one console, so I think that this could become the new standard. But I guess we'll probably have to wait a long time before we get to see that, or perhaps it'll become more clear when another game with the Hero of Wilds is given to us after Breath of the Wild 2. Some of you may know that the general consensus of Breath of the Wild on release was that it was a great game, an amazing game in fact. It went on to get a 97 score on Metacritic, but over the last few years, its flaws have been easier to spot and give criticism to. Even by myself, I think that over the last couple years, I've given the game a fair amount of that criticism. Even on this channel, I've discussed how the map could be better, how they should have done the shrines, the grindy nature of the Korok seeds, and most of all, the dungeons. However, there's a sizable amount of people that seem to straight up not like the open world format that Breath of the Wild has first thrown at us. This is not my personal opinion, but I'll speak on behalf of the people that have this opinion. Some people really would like the series to go back to the direction it seemed to be going, slowly becoming more and more linear with each entry. But the Zelda team seem to have this thing where if a game gets a lot of criticism over a certain aspect, in the next game they turn that issue into an overplay part in the game. The most recent two examples of this are the stretch between Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, as gamers wanted more dungeons than were seen in Wind Waker. Twilight Princess did exactly that and added a complete plethora of them. The most recent example is Skyward Sword to Breath of the Wild. People complained that Skyward Sword was too linear. So they did a complete 180 and did a giant breathtaking open world game. My point in this elongated section of the video is that the Breath of the Wild trilogy has officially made the open world genre a subparticle of the Zelda series. In simpler terms, before we had the rotation of 2D and 3D Zelda games, now we have to add open world games into the mix. This trilogy has single-handedly changed that rotation. Sure, Age of Calamity may not be a giant open world game, it may condense certain areas of the world down into sub-areas, but the point still stands that for a lot of people, Age of Calamity is a must, down to the fact that they'll see a pre-apocalyptic Hyrule, and that in itself should be enough to be known as an open world game. Linear 3D Zelda games reigned supreme for a fairly long time, even longer than linear 3D Mario games, and the fact that the games have changed the series rotation most probably forever is completely insane. As of the trilogy itself, let me sum it up once more. Breath of the Wild is possibly the most innovative Zelda game to date, completely blowing most open world games out of the water. Hyrule Warriors is the first official sort of spin-off series that is about to make it to canon lore and will probably tell us even more stories seen in Breath of the Wild. And as for the long-awaited Breath of the Wild 2, we don't know yet. We can only hope that it will build upon the first game's formula and will grow to be an even bigger success so that we can even see more open world games officially become a Zelda tradition. Now if you enjoyed this video then please do like and subscribe for more weekly Zelda content. If you want to and can then please check out my Patreon. Thanks to both of the lovely people who already donate, they're on screen right now, and the link is in the description for my Patreon. My social media handles are on screen and in the description right now, so check them out if you want to check out my daily life. And with all of that said, I'll see you all very soon to talk about Hyrule Warriors: The Age of Calamity. I hope you enjoyed, stay safe, and bye bye.